Good evening, everyone. I would call on His Eminence to commence this evening's proceedings with prayer.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Ευλογήτως η Χριστέ ο Θεός ημών, ο πανσόφους τους αλείς αναδείξας, καταπέμψας αυτής το πνεύμα το Αγίον και δι' αυτόν την οικουμένη σαγηνεύσας φιλάνθρωπε δόξασι.
Thank you. Please be seated. Your Eminence, Archbishop Makarios, Primate of the Greek Orthodox Church of Australia, it is indeed a great honour and a privilege for our parish and for the Archdiocese, by extension, for your presence here this evening and for your willingness to participate in this year's Orthodox Renewal Symposium. For the past 32 years, Your Eminence, this symposium was called the Short Course in Orthodox Studies, but we chose to focus on the renewal of our relationship with God, with the Orthodox faith, and with the sacramental life of the Church. We have had 5 speakers in the past 5 weeks, Your Eminence, including His Grace Bishop Emilianos, who spoke about humility, Father Dimitri Kokinos, who spoke about vigilance, Dr. Philip Kariatlis, who spoke about the Creed, Dr. Mario Bargos, who spoke about representing and relating to the saints. Last week we heard from Father Amphilochios, who spoke about the uniqueness of the Christ event, and this evening we have been waiting for the past year, Your Eminence, but what a wonderful opportunity this is to hear your talk on entitled Bioethics, the emerging frontier from an Orthodox standpoint. I wanted to introduce His Eminence as we normally would a person of such credentials. His Eminence just wants to know, for you and the viewing audience from home and across the world, to know that he's speaking this evening as the Archbishop of the Church of Australia. He has credentials, a doctorate in from the University of Crete, where his work was published under the title Cloning, Social, Ethical and Theological Components. So there is no need really to elaborate on his credentials and qualifications to give tonight's talk. We welcome especially not only the Reverend Fathers, but we welcome doctors, we welcome administrators, teachers, and professionals from all fields. It is now my great honour and privilege to invite His Eminence Archbishop Makarios to the dais. Your Eminence.
My dear friends, it is truly a pleasure for me to be with you this evening and to address the Orthodox Renewal Symposium, an initiative of St. Spyridon's Parish here in Kingsford, in conjunction with our theological school, St. Andrew's Theological College. Firstly, I would like to thank Father Stephen Skoutas, whose patronal feast day we celebrate today, for putting together such a rich and spiritually edifying program, together, of course, with the assistance of Father Amphilochios and the organizing committee. I was most pleased with the change of name for this wonderful event to Orthodox Renewal Symposium. In his letter to the Colossians, St. Paul speaks about the spiritual life precisely in terms of renewal when he writes, "You have clothed yourself with a new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its Creator, ενδυσάμενοι των νέων, των ανακαινούμενων εις επίγνωσιν κατ' εικόνα του κτίσαντος αυτών." May our life be such that we focus our attention and indeed our entire existence on renewal by becoming on a daily basis more and more Christ-like, not only the way we live our life on a personal level, but also in the way we interact with other people and the world more broadly. After these brief introductory remarks, let us turn to the topic of this evening's gathering. The title of the paper is Bioethics, the Emerging Frontier from an Orthodox Standpoint. After presenting some initial thoughts on the significance of bioethics, especially in light of unprecedented scientific advancements, we will focus our attention on some of the major bioethical challenges that human beings are called to face. In this way, the hope is that we will have provided an overview of some of the major bioethical issues that we must face and provide informed responses to not only as individuals, but also as the Church. Let us now turn our attention to the first section, Progress in Biotechnology. The argument is often made that man is the most perfect creature and therefore represents the epitome of creation. Science, history, daily life, and religious traditions that establish man under God, yet above the rest of creation, attests to this. The presence of man at the end of creation, his gradual creation rather than his immediate formation, as is the case with other organisms, and his installation as the administrator and steward of creation, seem to grant him a unique and benign authority. Such authority, according to use or abuse, has often been associated with humanity's happiness or misery. Perhaps what is occasionally said about the medical science is correct. That is, medicine has never been seen in such a beneficial light, but at the same time, it has never been viewed with such suspicion and uncertainty, especially in light of what lies ahead. We should not search for the causes of this new state of affairs beyond the condition of the human. One could say with certainty that modern man rushes to acquire knowledge. However, he is not searching for knowledge that benefits, but rather knowledge that ensures power and authority. Moreover, the idea that the more knowledge one possesses, the greater authority he possesses has now become etched in the mindset of modern man. The intellectual and informed person is he who possesses and understands. He is the person who possesses his own property within the boundless field of the universe. Thus, we see repeated in our own days that which occurred with the first humans who ate from the forbidden fruit of knowledge and suffered terrible consequences. It should be stated that their mistake was not that they tasted the fruit, since the fruit was indeed theirs, but that they rushed to eat the fruit. In other words, they prematurely ate from the tree, following their distorted desires. Something similar seems to occur today, especially since scientific research often seeks to penetrate the mystery of life and to achieve that which is unfeasible in an uncontrolled and unsustainable pace. Consider, for instance, that humanity never imagined that it would make such swift advancements in genetics. As a result of such development, we can now pre-screen and treat conditions during the embryonic state of human development, and we are even able to assist human reproduction through artificial means. No one could have ever imagined that we would be able to manufacture produce on demand, or that we would be able to determine the quality of characteristics of livestock. Today, however, this is quite common, and we have become accustomed to hearing about mutations and genetically modified organisms. Humanity has created an Aryan race of crops and livestock, emphasizing particular traits in order to increase levels of production. Moreover, modern scientists could have never expected to have such understanding and control over the human genome, especially since Whitson and Crick discovered the double helix structure of DNA in 1956. This discovery made it possible to study the most basic component in the development of biological organisms. As a result, scientists can now identify mutated or deficient genes and attempt to eliminate, correct, or enhance them. Researchers are now able to test for genetic diseases as they strive to develop treatments and enhancements to the human genome. There are remarkable advancements in the field of surgery, a specialized component of medicine with incredible potential. Artificial dialysis represents one of the greatest discoveries in this field. While the actual device for dialysis was invented in 1940, its use, however, was quite difficult because there was no way to connect the patient to the machine. In 1961, Dr. Beldin Scribner first conceived of a plastic tube which was used to connect patient to machine. With this simple achievement in medicine, people who were once doomed to die were given the chance to an extended life. Organ transplantation was a natural consequence following the discovery of hemodialysis. Researchers were able, after careful research, to understand and identify the mechanisms that joined organs and tissues. With this knowledge, they were able to successfully transfer organs from one organism to another. John Hunter, who attempted transplants of teeth and tissues in 1771, was the first person who used the term transplant. The first attempt of transplanting an organ occurred in 1954 with the transplant of a kidney, while in 1969, physicians for the first time attempted to transplant a human heart. Today, we transplant many organs and tissues: kidneys, heart, liver, lungs, pancreas, part of the small intestine, skin, muscles, blood vessels, heart vessels, cornea, as well as whole group of cells, such as those related to nerves and blood. A century ago, the transplantation of a heart, kidney, liver, or any other vital organ from one organism to another was mere science fiction. Finally, as we discuss the most recent achievements of genetics and biotechnology, it would be remiss if we do not mention the creation of Dolly. There was no way one could predict that science could be used to create an organism. It was even more difficult to imagine that multiple copies of a single organism could be produced through nuclear transfer using the differentiated nucleus of an adult cell. Today, this is feasible through cloning. Such methodologies were successfully used to clone mammals, paving the way for cloning to be used for reproductive and therapeutic purposes. We realize, therefore, that those things considered impossible and unachievable just a few years ago have become feasible, and we have actually begun achieving them. Development is rapidly progressing. Efforts are admirable. The results of science are celebrated. Nevertheless, the lingering question that keeps arising with each step forward is whether such advancements will be used for the benefit of man, allowing us to remain optimistic, or whether they will be utilized carelessly with virtue and discernment absent, causing ripples of unprecedented concern. History teaches us that science must be an uninterrupted dialogue between logic and ethics. Otherwise, the Platonic aphorism, "Every scientific endeavor devoid of virtue is diabolical and irrational." Parallel to the enthusiasm for human achievements, there are many questions that deserve responsible and informed responses. These questions could be grouped into three categories. The first category includes those issues related to the beginning of human life. The second category is related to those topics related to the duration of human life. And the third category highlights the end of biological life. Beyond this, our questions and general reflections will certainly help to better understand the driving force that led to the creation of a new scientific field of bioethics, which first appears in the 1970s. Let me say a few words about challenges related to the beginning of life. Modern genetics has managed to answer three human dreams. First, to avoid having children when this is not desirable. Man has achieved this through advances in contraception, sterilization, and abortion. Second, to have children when he desires them. This was achieved through assisted reproduction technologies and, in general, through treatments that address infertility. Third, having children exactly as he desires. And this has been achieved through pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which give us the ability to select for certain characteristics, traits. This becomes available soon after the decryption of human DNA and after developments in abortion techniques and in eugenics. Accordingly, a first glance of these issues inevitably leads us to ask whether it is acceptable to produce children according to predetermined human expectations, and whether the decryption of DNA will help humanity, or if it could ultimately lead us to seek the same horrific eugenic goals as in World War II. One is now left pondering whether there are such things as positive characteristics to humanity. The fact is that we can now use raw material and human intelligence to design ourselves. The result of such design, because it falls outside of the bounds of natural selection and is not an expression of love between two people, relies on laboratory producers and represents both the arrogance of human reason and also the desperation and despair of modern man. This exercise is both arrogant because we seek to create a person according to our own preferences. It is desperate because we constantly fail to overcome death and the fear that death stirs in us. We create man, therefore, according to our passions and desires, and this causes in us real anguish and fear. Our concerns are similarly intensified around prenatal diagnosis. Prenatal screening and diagnosis attempt to control and possibly correct certain defective genes. The goal is to prevent them from being transferred to future generations. Moreover, by studying and predicting trends in diseases and genetic predispositions, we can more easily identify possible treatments. However, there are questions about how such personal information will be used. Naturally, there are also fears about how such information may lead to violations in labor rights and decrease bias against people who are viewed as unhealthy. Prenatal screening is also utilized to diagnose a disease, syndrome, or chromosomal abnormality in the fetus. Many times, when testing yields undesirable results, people will end the pregnancy with few ethical issues to consider. What will occur when proposing abortion becomes the prevailing course of action under such circumstances? Aside from the fact that there is still a need for a broader understanding of illness, trials, and tribulations which are shunned by a humanity that prefers personal pleasure, we ought to also study the status of the embryo. There is a need to consider the fetus under the same light as we do all persons, rather than as an inferior object. To help us focus on this issue, consider the following very possible scenario that highlights the importance and value of life during all stages of development. A fetus is diagnosed with Huntington's disease, a condition that manifests itself after the age of 40. To understand the opportunities, prospects, and potential of a person who may live to his 40th year, consider Mozart, who at 40 years of age had already composed much of his music, and also consider Saint Basil the Great, who had largely completed all of his writings by that age. Thus, a disease presently expressed, or that is expected in the future, should not be used as a reason to terminate life. No matter what the disease, and no matter the stage in life a disease is first experienced, life must always have priority. What we observe in the case of abortion is that great emphasis is placed on human rights, that is, on the effort to connect a conscious and informed decision to childbearing and parenthood. If this cannot be maintained, it appears that human rights are violated. One-sided support of reproductive rights often conflicts and even eliminates the rights of children, which in some cases represent little more than another consumer good to be ordered and purchased. One of the tragic mistakes that often occur is that we separate the needs and rights of unborn children from the freedom and the right that one has to procreate. Balance requires that we secure the rights and respect both the parents and the unborn child. Moreover, we encounter a great dilemma surrounding the life of the embryo, which can be destroyed without any difficulty when someone decides that they wish to terminate a pregnancy. Human rights in this case are applicable in one direction only. Notwithstanding this dilemma, the issue becomes more complex when abortion is considered a way to end a pregnancy that resulted from rape or incest, or when a pregnancy threatens the woman's psychological well-being or puts in danger her life. How should we respond to these circumstances, and what decisions are required in order to defend life and the personal value of the fetus? Related to this issue of abortion, especially as it relates to the status and value of the embryo, is the issue of artificial reproduction technologies. Artificial reproduction technologies allow us to fertilize ova in vitro, transferring embryos into a woman's womb, into a woman's body. This method often produces multiple embryos, often for practical reasons. For instance, multiple eggs are fertilized at once because it is difficult to procure oocytes and because fertilizing multiple eggs at once will provide the embryos needed for multiple artificial reproduction technology cycles, if required. This leaves us facing a serious question. Can we proceed with artificial reproduction in light of the production of abundant embryos? What will become of an extra embryos once pregnancy is achieved? How will these embryos be used and handled? Should they be stored? For how long? And who decides their ultimate fate? Of course, legislation in some countries endeavors to resolve this problem, but at best, laws seem to only solve the practical aspects of the issue and not the moral, the ethical dilemmas. Similar problems arise with the issues of surrogacy when donor gametes are used, when a woman who utilizes in vitro fertilization and other artificial reproduction technologies is of an advanced age, and also when cryopreserved sperm of deceased men is used. Cloning seemed to represent an answer to the problem of excess embryos, since nuclear transfer will trigger only a single ovum, a single egg, which eventually will be implanted. Although cloning is still in its infancy, we can say with confidence that its use would potentially have irreparable consequences to human reproduction. And this is the case because cloning, when used as method of reproduction, eliminates genetic diversity. Cloning does not ensure the development of the species through mutations which occur naturally through sexual reproduction. In the final analysis, cloned organisms transfer the same genetic information from generation to generation, potentially leading to an epidemiological catastrophe. Essentially, reproductive cloning constitutes biological regression, condemning humanity to a genetic future based solely on its past. Of course, cloning does not only raise concerns because of its biological consequences, but it also raises a number of ethical issues, other ethical issues. For example, will cloning also undermine the uniqueness of the human person, given that it can theoretically produce an unlimited number of genetically identical organisms? What will theology have to say about cloning, since it allows for the production of a person without conception? That is, without the fertilization of an egg, which according to theology is the moment, the secret moment when ensoulment occurs. Accordingly, will a cloned human being have a soul? Moreover, what can we say about therapeutic cloning, through which we will theoretically be able to produce copies of ourselves to serve as warehouses of organs to be used for transplantation? Lastly, how can we accept the use of embryonic stem cells research? On the one hand, this may lead to new medical treatments. On the other hand, however, it inevitably destroys the embryos used for research. The aforementioned outlines the dilemmas related to the beginning of human life. Our concerns continue, however, with those ethical issues connected to the duration of human life, which are equally as important and critical. One of the most important ethical concerns in medicine connected to the duration of human life is organ transplantation. Although organ transplantation helps improve the quality of life and also extend life, it nevertheless continues to generate a number of concerns in the minds of people, especially with regards to the means by which organs are procured. There is serious concerns over misconduct, given the fact that the shortage of organs has influenced the way we approach a number of other issues, including anencephalic infants and the process by which we hasten death in order to procure organs. We could briefly say that the two main points of the ethical reflection on transplantation is, on the one hand, the possibility of abusing the free will of a potential donor, and on the other, the arbitrary determination of death. The first issue led to the notion of presumed consent, and the second led to the novel expression, brain death. The main problem today on this subject focuses on how consensual presumed consent is and how dead is brain death. We can also include within the category of the duration of human life that which is related to the family and the relationships between spouses, parents, and their children, and the family's relationship with society as a whole. The news media reminds us daily of the serious dilemmas that families face. For instance, domestic violence is an issue that is frequently reported. It significantly destabilizes the sacred institution of the family and trivializes human dignity. When speaking of domestic violence, we often focus our attention on the husband's abuse of his wife, battered woman, or parental abuse of minors, child abuse. We must, however, underline that there are four main forms of domestic violence according to international literature. 1, violence of children towards their parents. 2, violence of parents towards their children. 3, violence between spouses. 4, violence between siblings. Also, there is another sort of violence, which is the sexual violence. How we will help eliminate domestic violence and sexual abuse is the main issue. Most tend to condemn and marginalize the perpetrators and wish to dedicate more attention to the victims. However, responding in this way does little to address the internal condition of the perpetrator, because if left untreated, he will continue searching for other ways to satisfy his passion. Perhaps then, what we ought to do is ensure that we address the condition of the abuser while caring for the person who has been abused. It may be helpful to also consider that perpetrators of such abuse may have, at one point or another, been also the victims of abuse. Should love be directed towards the abuser and the abused, or is this merely ideological and utopian theory? Similar to this, and at times even related to the issue of domestic violence, is the issue of addiction. Since all addictions disrupt balanced coexistence within a family and society, it is clear that along with the addicted person, there are also those who are codependents, the husband or the wife, children, other relatives, and friends. How are we to address our family members and friends who are addicted to drugs and alcohol? For instance, how should the wife and children deal with their alcoholic husband and father? And how should parents protect their child who is addicted to drugs? Such being the case, we must also address the condition of those individuals who, by virtue of their relationship to the addict and the perpetrator, must endure an array of irrational demands of the abuser and addict. Addiction is a great chapter in our society. Many, irrespective of their religious convictions, their national origin, their social background, and educational level, face an uncontrollable passion that resembles idolatry. Essentially, the word addiction describes an unhealthy relationship with substances or behaviors that alter one's thought, making it impossible for the addicted person to control his life. Of course, every form of addiction has a particular consequence. Alcohol and drug addiction seem to be very common and lead to well-known consequences, including major withdrawal symptoms, isolation and antisocial behavior, aggression and violence, and the overall loss of physical and mental health. Undoubtedly, alcohol and drug addiction resembles a compound that literally destroys everything: family, relationships, careers, social living, health, and economic vitality. Moreover, it is also known that in order to feed one's addiction, he or she may become involved in selling drugs, prostitution, theft, or other criminal acts. Today, however, we also observe other expressions of addiction that are just as dangerous, such as obesity, food addiction, uncontrollable consumerism, the addiction to shopping, usually through the procuring of debt, religious fanaticism, addiction to religious context, persons, situations, superstitions, magic, etc., and gambling. While not such is said about them, there are also addictions related to work and to sex, which seem to have risen to epidemic levels. In the former case, people who multitask suddenly find themselves prisoners of endless desires, perfectionism, and a greedy thirst for the acquisition of time and money. The workaholic is never on time, is always rushing desperately, which means that he is also likely to neglect his family and his social cycle of friends, and in many cases, he suffers from sleep disorders and depression due to high levels of anxiety. Unfortunately, this is exacerbated by today's way of life, primarily in capitalist societies, where competition and the expansion of wealth are embraced as ideas, often at the expense of justice and fairness. Moreover, such systems tend to favor the rich, giving them greater opportunities to expand their wealth while exhausting the poor and weak. Such a society, then, pressures man to become more efficient and work intensively to remain productively, thereby increasing his wealth. Eventually, however, man is overwhelmed and becomes part of the dysfunctional condition. In the latter case, things are more serious, since sexual addiction continues to claim ever more victims, particularly with the ease with which we access the Internet which has literally attacked our homes, our private spaces, our bedrooms, our schools, our workplace, and even our pockets via mobile technology. Sexually addicted people become trapped in a world of sexual fantasy and debauchery. This will eventually lead to an isolated lifestyle where the person ignores other obligations. Furthermore, they often experience difficulty functioning sexually under all other circumstances and have a hard time conducting any work if they don't first have their dose of sexual stimulation. Excessive sexual pleasure can cause one to assume a sexual identity which can only be fulfilled by embracing and realizing their sexual desires by wearing sexual clothing, consuming sexual food and drink, listening to sexual music, watching sexual movies, and utilizing products and medications to enhance their sex drive. Addiction creates serious ethical dilemmas that go well beyond the boundaries of biology and medical intervention. In fact, we should say that medicine alone, without the assistance of the Church or the presence of some spiritual or psychological interventions, has a difficult time treating a person with any addiction. Furthermore, human experimentation is quite an important topic related to the duration of human life. We recognize that biotechnology can only continue to develop through testing and experimentation. Who, however, ought to undergo such experiments? Well known are the terrible crimes conducted in the last century, not only during the Second World War, but also with each subsequent violation of the Nuremberg Code. For instance, we know that the dysentery vaccine was tested on children in orphanages. Mentally ill patients and prisoners were infected with the malaria virus, and similar experiments were conducted while researching yellow fever, measles, syphilis, and other diseases. More recently, it was discovered that during the Cold War, hospitalized patients were injected with plutonium and uranium. Institutionalized children were injected with radioactive material, and experiments that exposed the sexual organs of prisoners to radiation were also conducted. Moreover, during this time, the CIA distributed hallucinogenic drugs, LSD, to patients without their knowledge or consent. Today, all of humanity faces a terrible pandemic, the well-known COVID-19. We are all suffering because of the restrictions, and more so, we are mourning because of the death toll, which is now more than 1,400,020. Our hope is that science will provide a vaccine soon, one which will confront the pandemic without having any side effects on us. Under regular circumstances, we are supposed to test every vaccine for years or even for decades. However, in this instance, scientists have driven past the norms and are rapidly conducting experiments in a period of only a few months, something extremely unprecedented in research history. Most of our brothers and sisters will take the vaccine, especially the vulnerable ones. It is worrisome, though, that we do not know what the real consequences and the side effects of this may be. We do not even know the origin of some vaccines. As you know, or maybe know, my humble person with the Catholic and Anglican archbishops have expressed these concerns to our Prime Minister, especially since one of the most popular proposed vaccine choices has been developed by tissue from electively aborted fetuses used for medical purposes. Obviously, many of our faithful will feel deeply conflicted and have already presented their ethical dilemmas. We are thus left wondering whether it is possible for medical science to progress without human experimentation. Moreover, we are forced to think about the immense economic interests associated with pharmaceuticals. Is it possible that certain treatments have now become solely the privilege of the wealthy? Is it possible for us to accept research on human embryos? Can Christian anthropology acknowledge the human being as merely biological material? On the other hand, what pastoral solutions can be offered? Prohibitions, of course, often constitute easy solutions. However, is it appropriate for orthodoxy to denounce both research and researchers by issuing general statements of condemnation? Can we place barriers on research, given that it is impossible for the Church to limit such work. People suffering from HIV, AIDS, also fall into the category of ethics and the duration of life. Granted, in advanced countries, like here, patients with AIDS have been able to prolong their lives through advances in medication. We should not, however, forget the global AIDS epidemic, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. It is known that some African natives have sought to become infected with the virus because pharmaceutical companies that wish to study their behavior consider them useful. These people, once infected, are viewed as test subjects. And while up to this point they may have had nothing to eat or drink and no place to sleep, they suddenly find themselves with a bed and clean linens. They go on to enjoy the care provided by researchers and healthcare workers. They are housed in a healthcare facility rather than dwell in a store hut, and most importantly, they are given breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Therefore, they much rather die from AIDS, from a dignity virus, than from hunger, thirst, and other hardships. Yet one more issue that should greatly trouble us is man's relationship to the natural environment. Orthodoxy maintains that people must be good stewards of God's creation. This can only be realized when we finally understand that nature is not our personal property, and we accept that we do not have the right to abuse it as we seek to fulfill our personal aspirations. Unfortunately, there is a prevailing theory of man as dominator, that is, as the owner and master of the world. Perhaps this abusive, authoritarian perspective over nature is what led to unexpected and unfavorable consequences. Given this reality, the questions are endless. For instance, we say that it is good to emphasize man's stewardship of the natural world rather than his reign over it. Practically speaking, however, what does Christian anthropology have to say about abnormal weather phenomena, or about the contamination of the environment, human experimentation on animals and plants, or about humanity's creation and use of bioweapons, and our role in the extinction of species and the emergence of new diseases? The aforementioned considerations help us paint a picture of the ethical issues that arise during the course of human life. We have not referred to every issue. There are several others, including family planning, contraception, stress and anxiety, racism, violence at schools, and the economic and financial crisis. Reference to only a select number of issues has been made because our goal is to raise awareness around some of the more central issues. These questions of course, are not limited to the duration of life, but also extend into the secret hour of death. Because the time has passed, I'm not going to analyze the issues related to the end of human life, but I promise you that in the future, on another occasion, I will present the bioethical challenges related to human end. My dearest fathers and friends, the aforementioned issues declare in the clearest way that medicine cannot improve with ethical elements without the support of theology. Don't forget that the roots of bioethics can be traced to antiquity. It is here that we discover ethics which is applied to medical science and practice, although in a different form. The power of healing in ancient times was largely viewed as some metaphysical or divine gift, which meant that in many cases the power to heal was associated with ritual and prayer. Even under such circumstances, people feared that medicine could potentially harm the patient and even serve its own purposes. Our theology and our spirituality have the qualifications not necessarily to provide answers on bioethical issues, but to offer the presuppositions and the principles that will help us to make the correct decisions. I believe that when we are asked to answer bioethical questions, we have to feel that we are in the same reign where St. John the Chrysostom, St. Gregory the Theologian, St. Basil the Great, St. John of Damascus, and all the saints and fathers are present. We just have to pray and to simply transfer their wisdom and light to the scientific world. Thank you very much for your attention.
We thank you, Your Eminence, for your courage to speak about all of the topics and challenges that we ordinary people face in the world. And I think that you've reflected in your talk this evening the questions that most of us in the Church have. And you've responded not only with your knowledge, but with your broader understanding of these moral issues that face individuals and couples and society at large. We thank you profusely, Your Eminence, and let's show our appreciation once again. Once again, Your Eminence, thank you for your patience, but thank you most especially for your knowledge and for the love with which you express the teachings of the Church. We would like to express our gratitude to you this evening by way of a small gift, and I'll ask Father Amphilochios to present it to you. A symbolic gift of our love, and devotion, and respect.
Usually gifts are being received from those who have their name day. I don't have my name day today, but I'm very prepared. And as you know, Father Stylianos has his name day today, and also Father Amphilochios had his name day a few days ago, 3 days ago. So I have something for both. It's same because Father Amphilochios is a little bit jealous. It is a small gospel, it's silver, and it is a copy of the Evangelio of the Agona. On this Evangelio, they took the oath for our nation and for our faith in 1821. This is a copy. So God bless you. Father Amphilochios. And now I can open mine. Είναι καλή μου. I know you want to see it. Embroidery eye. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
If we could kindly be upstanding for prayer, please.
Να πούμε το Πάτερ ημών όλοι μαζί. Our Father, who art in heaven, thy kingdom name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive those who trespass, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. Διευχών των Αγίων Πατέρων ημών, Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ ο Θεός ημών, ελέησον και σώσον ημάς. Αμήν. Καλά Χριστούγεννα σε όλους. Καλά Χριστούγεννα.